In pursuit of good understanding. If you're out there listening to this, you're probably somebody who's interested in critical thinking in the church, and you don't want to be someone who's just shallow, but someone who really thinks about the world and walks in the truth. Because what is more fun, what's more beautiful than walking in the truth and thinking clearly and having your mind in a sound place? We read there in Romans chapter 12 about God wanting to come and transform our minds, that every day we should have our minds transformed. And you know what? It really is true. It's really a good gift from God. So today we're going to be going to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 15, where it reads, "Good understanding gains favor, but the way of treachery ever flows." So we're going to be talking about what it means to have good understanding. Because one of the things which is fundamentally true about fallen creation is that the cold, hard data is oftentimes not as honest as it appears to be. I'm a pastor at Jolton Church of the Nazarene. And though I'm online right now with Kingdom of the Logos, when it comes to my actual, church and the congregation that I deal with, the flesh and blood people, quite often I have to give numbers in to the district. And you know what? There is a thing known as preacher math. There are some people who will count the 2 cockroaches they saw in the kitchen. There will be somebody who said, we had a plumber come over to fix the toilet last Thursday night. Count them in our Sunday numbers. The joke going among preachers, whether big church, small church, is that preacher math kind of counts anything and everything. And those honest, cold numbers are not as honest as they really are. When it comes to a lot of data that we see going on in our world right now, the propaganda arm knows that we've kind of got to this point where our society no longer appreciates truth. It certainly doesn't respect God. It doesn't respect the authority of God and, the Christian faith. And so kind of now we have the new science religion out there where some people will still bow down before that. And just in general, people are a lot more comfortable when they have metrics in life. This whole idea that you can just take away belief altogether really doesn't work. No one is as much of an atheist as they think they are. They just have idols and totems and things like that they follow. So today we're going to be talking about good understanding, how we really walk in the truth. And Proverbs 13 has a great lesson in simply its choice of vocabulary, because it opens up by saying good understanding. And it couples the word understanding, this word which can also be translated as insight, as discernment, discretion, knowledge, that sort of thing. This word understanding is coupled to another Hebrew word, Tob. And it's the same word that God uses there in Genesis 1 when God creates the heavens and the earth, and he sees the thing that he has made, and he finds it to be beautiful and pleasing, and God says that it is good. And one of the things which always fascinates me about that is God declaring things good is not actually necessary to just the raw data of creation. It's an extra step that adds richness to the world around us. So today we're going to be talking about all this, but I want to start by saying the good is not optional. Neither is belief. Belief itself is actually not something which is optional in the world around us. And when I look at the world, whether I see things within the church or things outside of the church, I see 2 types of belief that people fundamentally grab onto in life. They have 2 types of logic that they buy into. One of them is sort of the serpent in the garden's logic that says, did God really say? The alternative is kind of the faithful, God-fearing option that says, yes, God did say. For a lot of the popular atheists and things of that in our world, their argument is, did God really say that, there's a biblical sexual, morality? Did God really say that a man should need a woman and they complete one another when they come together in family? And, children need their biological mom and dad at home. They need this structure. Did God really say all of that? Or is that just something that's an old myth from the past that we can reject and choose as we want to? That's one way that the did God really say methodology comes out. Another way it actually comes out is with people who are still in the church. And let us not kid ourselves, the devil is not in the business of... Often, he doesn't always fight the church outright. A lot of times he comes and joins the church as wolves in sheep's clothing. Scripture doesn't warn us against wolves. It warns us against wolves in sheep's clothing. But when you come to look at Christianity inside, you also find people. You'll find sometimes whole denominations. You'll find, academic types, authors, sometimes just people sitting in the pews where they'll say, I can't really believe that. Right now, it's really popular for people to kind of disparage the book of Revelation for whatever reason. they don't really fully believe in it. It seems to be so symbolic, so peculiar that they can't fully believe in it. So they'll just say it's just symbolic poetry. That's it. Which is the same thing as did God really say? We will look at, different things throughout the Old and New Testament, and we'll say, did God really, have the plagues come against Egypt? Did God really do that? That doesn't sound like the God that I want to have, so I'm not going to go along with it. And the whole idea of handling belief as the did God really say mentality is really this is going to be a large kind of academic term. It's an epistemology. It's a form of gathering truth. We go out and we gather our groceries, we gather our things that we do. If you're like me, you go out and gather old square body trucks and you have a good time with that. But we gather things in life, and when it comes to how we gather truth, the did God really say, that first category of belief, it begins with what am I willing to accept and what do I want? And really, beneath all of that is, did God really say? If that doesn't seem like what I would want God to say, I just ignore it. If I want to shake my fist at God, I can write it all off. And that's a very destructive thing. It's a very small way to live as well, because it keeps you from ever reaching transcendentals, keeps you from reaching things larger than yourself, some eternal truths. It always ultimately brings you to a place where the only thing you believe in is actually yourself. If you only believe in the parts of the Bible that you agree with, you don't believe in the Bible, you believe in yourself. And in our world, we oftentimes find ourselves being bombarded by this sort of epistemology, this sort of belief which only believes in the things which are easy to believe, the things which are comfortable to believe. There's a great line from the X-Files where a man tells Fox Mulder, he says, are you willing to sacrifice yourself to the truth? There's a boxcar with evidence buried out here in the desert, and many people know about it, but they aren't willing to sacrifice themselves to the truth, so they just ignore it. And the government just kind of leaves it out there, though they know it's there. We have to be willing to sacrifice ourselves to the truth. A lot of times we do see evil happening in the world. We're seeing scams, lies being perpetuated around the world, and a lot of times we'll say, it can't really be that all these people would lie to me, when in fact they are. We cannot fall for the trap of belief that said, did God really say? Did those people really just scam me? Is it really possible for all those things to be? That is a bad form of understanding truth, and it's not the good understanding which is found in Proverbs 13:15. Now, opposite of that is proper belief. Proper belief that says, yeah, God did really say. I don't understand everything that may be in the book of Revelation because it's sight into things unseen. We don't normally see the cosmic spiritual warfare fighting out. So when we read about St. Michael taking his sword and slitting the devil's throat, that seems like a peculiar thing to think about. We don't always see a material manifestation of blasphemy and lies. We usually have deceptions and things on the world which don't take a material form, but they come in the form of narrative stories and just scams that people run. So when we see the beast in Revelation 13, it is the very incarnation of a lie. It's the very incarnation of blasphemy. It's strange to actually see that appear. So it feels odd to us. But if we are to be a real people of belief, we say, you know what? It is strange. There is an element of mystery to it. But I'm going to believe in it because I believe in truth. I believe in transcendentals. I believe in the good. Believing in the good is very, very important. So much of our world is designed to encourage shallow lusts at the cost of lasting meaning. Just about everything around us is cheap, fleeting, and ultimately empty. And we have to understand that the way that this has happened, the way that we've been taken away from good understanding to cheap, just misunderstandings and errors and sinful, deceitful ways of thought, is often because our pursuit of truth is not willing to go all in. When it comes to our desires as humans, and please forgive me, I'm using the church studio today, which is a little bit different than my home studio, and it's just different to use the equipment in here, so I know I hit the microphone a few times. When it comes to our desires, we can really categorize our desires in two categories. We have the shallow lusts and then the deep longings. And what's strange is the shallow lusts and the deep longings, they oftentimes have the same impetus. They have the same impetus, the same impulse, and the same motivation inside our hearts. Take, for instance, a man might lust for adultery, sort of the sexual immorality that comes with adultery, but in truth, he longs for a family. adultery, it is a perversion of many of the elements of family that are sold to someone very cheaply, but we actually have a real deep longing for the family. And whenever we go out to do the adulterous deeds, that's a perversion of the actual family desires. When it comes to how we pursue truth, we oftentimes would rather have our ears tickled by the things that we can handle. Learning that you've been lied to is not a fun thing to do, so a lot of times people will just stick their head in the sand. They don't want to admit that they've been lied to. We'd rather have our ears tickled than sacrifice ourselves to the truth. Having your ears tickled is a cheap lust, where sacrificing yourself to the truth, that is a deep longing. That is a material good that has eternal value. And when I say material good, I mean it's something that's real. It's actually part of reality. It's not just a fantasy. It's not just a narrative, but it's something that's real. And so when we come to Proverbs 13:15, it reads, "Good understanding gains favor." And we need to understand what good understanding is. Now, Proverbs, each verse in Proverbs is really its own moral lesson. And in this 15th verse of the 13th proverb, it juxtaposes good understanding, good proper knowledge, against the way of treachery. Now, I think the NIV translates the way of treachery is the way of the faithless. I think the NRSV does unfaithful, and I think the King James does treacherous. But it juxtaposes good understanding with another Hebrew word, which is bagad, which really refers to things which are betraying their own, people who've turned their back on their own. So there's good understanding, and then there are the things that turn their back on their own. Well, to make sure that we're in that first category, we really have to understand the word good. The reason why we find so much data being corrupted and destroyed here in our world, whether it be people lying about statistics, whether it be something small like the pastor lying about how many people were at church, or big global things to do with, the healthcare industry, things like that, where there's lying. The reason why the cold, hard data is not as cold and hard as it often appears to be is because living people are involved in it. Living people are recording it, living people are interpreting the data, and we always do come to the table with some sort of bias. We've been taught in the past that some sort of bias is bad, but the truth of the matter is you actually can't escape it. It's actually the wrong conversation. It's not that it's erroneous to try to, spend all your time focusing on bias. It's that it's actually nonsense in the end. We always have principles. We always have metrics which we weigh the world against. Mathematics itself is something which can't be proven. Why do we live in a universe of order where 2 + 2 always equals 4? It seems like a given that it would always equal 4. But if the world is actually random, that it's just a random collection of cells, you might wake up tomorrow and gravity no longer works. If you lived in a world where chaos was ultimately the guiding light. But we don't live in a universe without order. We do live in a universe where God created things and he put a natural goodness in the world which keeps things cohesive. The same way that you cannot prove, why it is that anything exists at all, and by that I mean getting back to the fundamental of why, like why is there light? Why is there gravity? Why is there mass? Why is there ever energy? Either God created it or it randomly happened. And if everything is just a random, spontaneous happening, well, then you would expect the laws of the universe to be random and spontaneous, but they're not. This is where we get back to the understanding of good and real, proper principles. When it comes to how we live as people, even atheists, you will typically find they're vegans. They are very concerned about the environment. Why? Because you actually have to have some sort of morality. A lot of times they get really big into climate change, people who claim to be atheists. Why? Because you actually need some sort of end times thinking in order to navigate the world. You need to have a way of figuring out who's moral, who's not, who is in the good and who is not. How you define good is very, very important because we all do it. If you did not have any understanding of what was good in life, you would go outside, you would strip down naked and wait to die. In Proverbs 13:15, it uses a specific word to teach us about the good. It talks about tob. Now, when we see mankind made, there in Genesis 1, God creates them male and female. God creates mankind into the family. And what we learn from that is to understand the goodness of life, we have to understand how essential the family is. The good is not optional in order to actually understand data. If you try to remove the good from knowledge, if you try to remove the good from truth, you're going to end up like the Nazi scientist who experiments on people and does wicked, wicked things. And inversely, if you try to just do compassion without truth either, if you try to do compassion without a true understanding of the good, you'll end up being like the Soviets who say, well, we're going to fix the economy and, we're going to have poor people no longer be ruled by the bourgeoisie, and you kill, 17 million people in a very short span of time. Truthless compassion is as evil as compassionless truth. You have to couple the two things together. The good and the understanding are a unit. And it's a very important thing for us to understand when we come to Proverbs, and if we want to live a life of real holiness. So, good understanding the Tob, it is connected, when we look at mankind, we look at our situation, with the family. God sees the family, it is good. The family structure is one of the few things in life which God has given to mankind, it's older than sin, that is actually an inherent good. Now, our modern world has come to the idea where it thinks the family is optional, or the family can be redesigned as whatever you want it to be, but that's not really how things work. When you look to the Ten Commandments, the first commandment given to you that is specific to humanity, you have, the first four, which deal with your relationship with God, the fourth looking at the Sabbath, but the first one that looks at mankind specifically is the fifth commandment. Honor thy father and mother, that thy days be long in the land the Lord God giveth unto thee. And that's a lot more than just obeying your parents. When you honor your mother and father, this is an idea that says, I actually honor my own genetic potential. It is very much about taking care of them, but it's about a lot more than that. Kind of in a lot of Wesleyan circles, like the Church of the Nazarene, we've taken and translated this verse into take care of those who can't take care of themselves. Don't do that. Don't cheapen it. You're cheapening that verse with a lesser meaning than what it really has. It does mean to take care of people who can't take care of themselves, but it's much deeper than that as well. There are differences between men and women. There are differences between young people and older people. There's differences between people who have finished their cognitive development and people who have not. Young people, they have to honor their mother and father when they're young, so that when they become an adult, they are able to love themselves and are actually able to have high aspirations. Our modern world has told us that fatherhood is optional, that you can have children at home without a father. And what that turns into is a lot of young men who are depressed. They then go out and they have children out of wedlock. They're not involved in their children's lives. And we do know that not having fathers in the home is singularly the biggest risk factor that we can put on paper for all the social issues going on in our world. Our world oftentimes wants to tie them to race, income and circumstances and things like that. The one factor that weighs against all others is whether or not the father is at home. The father is not optional. The family life is not optional. When children are young, they really need to honor their mother so that they can learn to empathize and to have those social skills where they interact. And when they're older, when they're a teenager, they need to have that honor for their father so they can really actually have confidence in themselves. This is not something you can escape. It's not an option. It is real. If people don't honor their parents, they will not have long days in life. And by that, I mean they'll oftentimes be depressed. But our world has positioned us to where this is very common that people do have broken relationships with their parents. And so they're separated from the good understanding. And they find themselves in a way that, whether intentionally or not, it's ever flowing with a sort of treachery, even an internal treachery where your mind is betraying itself, where there's some sort of internal conflict, where you're not really happy with life, you're not really happy with yourself, and there's a perpetual sorrow that goes on that's very, very sad. It's very severe for people. It's not something that I'm talking about in a means to demean it, but it's something which I want to help people overcome as a pastor. And in order for us to do that, we have to be honest about how God created us and what it means to walk in the good. To walk in the good, we have to honor our family. And what that means is when parents have wronged their children, which is a very common thing to do. In fact, it's so common that when John the Baptist is foretold to Zechariah, the angel Gabriel tells Zechariah that John the Baptist is going to turn parents back towards their children. The archangel Gabriel does not have to say that to Zechariah because so many parents were good to their children. The reason why the archangel Gabriel has to tell that to Zechariah about John the Baptist is because literal tons, legions of parents were not doing their children honorably. And it was maiming and scarring children for life. It's a very serious thing. God looks at it very severely. You find in things like Matthew 18, Matthew chapter 19, Jesus give a very staunch warning against people who set stumbling blocks before children. And then coupling that up with saying, I'm the good shepherd. I will go a long way to find the one lone sheep who is gone, the one lost, lonely child. I will do a lot to go out and find them. We have to find in Christianity the ability to forgive parents who have done things that are wrong. Because if we don't do that, we won't ever be able to have the good understanding. And this goes back to what I opened up with, talking about the good is not optional and neither is belief. There are two types of belief. There's the type of belief that said, did God really say? And the other type of belief that says, yes, God did really say. When it comes to forgiving parents, a lot of times the cost is very expensive. And we will adopt the did God really say mentality. A lot of times preachers, they will avoid the conversation because it's not politically correct to say that the family is necessary, and the family structure as God designed it is the path towards beauty. It's the path toward goodness. It's not always the path towards satisfied desire. It's not always the path towards, immediate pleasures. In fact, oftentimes it requires perseverance, endurance. It requires a huge amount of sacrifice in you setting aside your personal ambitions and desires to give something greater to the people around you, which ultimately, in the end, it does turn out to be a bigger blessing there on yourself. And of course, when we stand naked before God on the day of judgment, God will look at people who overcome and persevere and said, well done, my good and faithful servant. You were faithful with the talents I gave you, the people I put in your life. You were honorable and loving to them despite their own faults. And therefore, you shall be entered into the joy of your master. I would be doing you a disservice as a pastor if I lied about all that or if I shortchanged it or cheapened it. We have to have the sort of belief that says God did really tell us to forgive one another, to actually honor our parents. And when we actually do that, we do find a new ability to love ourselves, a new ability to have joy, and a new ability to walk in the good understanding. The good understanding. The real, proper Tob. So we'll wrap up our program there. I did write a whole sermon here and preached it last night. What you got online is fundamentally different from my notes. We had a whole program on good understanding, looking at all sorts of things from Proverbs 13:15. But I think we really need to just have the conversation we did now. To understand the good, you really have to understand the family. And to understand any of that, you have to understand what it means to believe. And then to understand that this sort of belief, this sort of goodness, it's not optional. That's the only way you actually get the proper understanding, the real wisdom, the actual virtue, prudence. It comes through that avenue. So on that note, thank you for joining me. May God bless and keep you. And I'll talk to you later. This is Pastor J. Dillon Proctor of Kingdom of the Logos.